I will never forget my wedding reception with empty tables where my family was supposed to sit. Not my parents, not my brothers, not even my sister came, because they thought I was marrying beneath me. "He drives a pickup truck and works with his hands," my mother had said with disgust. "This is not the life we raised you for." They thought I was throwing my life away. What they never imagined was that Kevin had been living a double life, hiding a fortune beyond their comprehension. And when the truth came out, my family's desperate scramble to return wasn't just shameful. It revealed a darkness that made their absence look merciful. Before we dive into my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you've experienced family betrayal, hit that like button, you're not alone. My name is Alison Crawford, and I grew up in the wealthy suburb of Westchester County, New York. My father, Richard Crawford, built his fortune as a corporate attorney specializing in mergers and acquisitions. By the time I was born, he was already pulling in 7 figures annually, representing some of the biggest names on Wall Street. My mother, Patricia, came from old money herself. The Worthington family had been prominent in New York society for generations, with a trust fund that ensured she never had to work a day in her life. Together, they created what appeared to be the perfect upper-class American family. Our house was a testament to their success. A sprawling colonial estate with 12 rooms, situated on 3 acres of meticulously maintained grounds. The circular driveway could accommodate 8 cars comfortably, which was necessary during my mother's frequent charity galas and dinner parties. Inside, everything screamed expensive taste. Crystal chandeliers imported from Austria hung in the foyer and dining room. Persian rugs worth more than most people's cars covered the hardwood floors. The living room featured a baby grand piano that my mother insisted I learn to play, though she cared more about the aesthetic than my actual musical ability. Growing up in this environment meant that appearances were everything. My mother scheduled weekly etiquette lessons for me starting at age 7. I learned proper posture, how to hold a teacup correctly, and the difference between various types of forks at a formal place setting. These weren't just lessons, they were preparation for the life she expected me to lead. A life of charity luncheons, country club memberships, and marriage to someone who could maintain or elevate our family's social standing. My older brother, Jonathan, fit perfectly into this mold. At 32, he was a successful investment banker at Goldman Sachs, married to Amanda, whose father owned a chain of luxury hotels across the East Coast. Their wedding 3 years earlier had been featured in Town and Country magazine, a fact my mother mentioned at least once a week. Jonathan lived in a penthouse on the Upper East Side and drove a BMW that cost more than most people's annual salaries. He was everything my parents wanted in a son, the golden child who validated their approach to life. My younger brother, Marcus, was following the same path at 28. He worked as a corporate lawyer at a prestigious Manhattan firm, following directly in my father's footsteps. Marcus had recently gotten engaged to Sophia Blackwell, whose family owned significant real estate throughout Manhattan. Their engagement party had been held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, with over 300 guests in attendance. My mother spent months planning every detail, from the imported flowers to the string quartet that performed during cocktail hour. Then there was me, the middle child who somehow became the family disappointment. At 29, I had committed the cardinal sin of falling in love with someone who didn't fit their carefully constructed image of success. Kevin Morrison was everything my family despised in a potential son-in-law. He drove a Ford pickup truck that was 5 years old and showed signs of daily use. His hands bore calluses from actual physical work, something that horrified my mother every time she was forced to shake them. He owned a construction company, which in my family's view was barely a step above manual labor. But what my family never bothered to discover was that Kevin was one of the most intelligent, compassionate, and genuinely good men I had ever met. He had started his construction business right out of high school, working 18-hour days to build a reputation for quality and reliability. Over the years, he had expanded from residential repairs to commercial projects, employing 37 people who spoke of him with genuine respect and admiration. He read voraciously, everything from philosophy to modern fiction, and could hold conversations on topics ranging from architecture to environmental sustainability. Kevin and I met at a coffee shop in Manhattan on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. I was running late for a client meeting at the marketing firm where I worked, juggling my laptop bag, purse, and an umbrella that had turned inside out in the wind. As I rushed through the door, I collided with someone carrying 2 large cups of coffee. The impact sent both cups flying, covering us both in hot liquid and creating a scene that drew stares from everyone in the crowded shop. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," I gasped, looking up at the man I had just drenched. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark brown hair and the most striking green eyes I had ever seen. Instead of the anger I expected, his face showed genuine concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked, completely ignoring his soaked shirt and focusing entirely on me. "That coffee was pretty hot." "I'm fine, but your shirt is ruined," I said, mortified by the brown stains spreading across what appeared to be a well-made white button-down. He laughed, a warm sound that immediately put me at ease. "Shirts can be replaced. Besides, I was the one standing too close to the door. Let me buy you a replacement coffee, and maybe we can call it even." That simple act of kindness led to a 20-minute conversation that felt like it lasted seconds. Kevin had an easy way of talking, asking questions that showed genuine interest in my answers. He made me laugh with stories about construction site mishaps and listened intently when I mentioned my frustration with a difficult client. By the time I realized I was 30 minutes late for my meeting, I had already agreed to have dinner with him the following Friday. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant in Greenwich Village, the kind of place with checked tablecloths and candles stuck in wine bottles. Kevin arrived wearing dark jeans and a navy sweater that brought out his eyes, carrying a single white rose that he presented with a slightly embarrassed smile. The conversation flowed naturally, covering everything from our childhoods to our dreams for the future. He told me about his plans to expand his business into sustainable construction methods, his passion for environmental responsibility evident in every word. What struck me most was how present he was during our conversations. He put his phone away the moment we sat down and gave me his complete attention throughout the evening. He asked thoughtful questions about my work in marketing, my thoughts on various books I mentioned reading, and my experiences growing up in Westchester. When I told him about my family's expectations and the pressure I felt to conform to their vision of success, he listened without judgment, offering insights that showed both intelligence and empathy. "Success means different things to different people," he said, twirling pasta around his fork with surprising grace. "Some people measure it by their bank account or their job title. Others measure it by the relationships they build or the positive impact they have on their community. Neither approach is right or wrong, but I think you have to decide for yourself which kind of success matters to you." That conversation stayed with me long after he walked me to my apartment and kissed me goodnight with gentle confidence. Over the following weeks, we fell into a comfortable routine of dinners, long walks through Central Park, and weekend adventures exploring different neighborhoods in the city. Kevin introduced me to parts of New York I had never experienced, from food trucks in Queens to art galleries in Brooklyn. He seemed to know someone everywhere we went, from the elderly man who ran a bookstore in the village to the young woman who sold paintings in Washington Square Park. What impressed me most was how he treated everyone with the same respect and genuine interest, whether we were talking to a homeless veteran outside a subway station or dining at an upscale restaurant in Midtown. Kevin carried cash specifically to give to people asking for help, and he knew several homeless individuals by name, stopping to ask about their health or job prospects. He never made a show of his generosity, treating these interactions as natural parts of his day. After 3 months of dating, I knew I was falling in love. Kevin made me feel valued for who I was rather than what my family name could provide or what connections I might offer. He supported my career ambitions while challenging me to think beyond the narrow definition of success I had been raised with. When I mentioned wanting to volunteer with a literacy program, he spent an entire Saturday helping me research different organizations. When I expressed interest in learning photography, he surprised me with a weekend workshop led by a professional photographer he had met through his work. But I also knew that introducing Kevin to my family would be a disaster. Everything about him, from his profession to his pickup truck, would reinforce their prejudices about people outside their social circle. I tried to prepare them gradually, mentioning Kevin's intelligence, his business success, and his kindness during phone calls home. But each attempt was met with polite disinterest that barely concealed their disapproval. Construction work is so temporary, my mother said during one of our weekly lunch dates at the country club. What happens when his body can't do physical labor anymore? You need to think about long-term security, darling. He owns the company, Mom. He has 37 employees and contracts with major developers throughout the city. It's not like he's swinging a hammer all day, I explained, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. Still, it's not exactly the kind of work that leads to social advancement, she replied, sipping her wine with practiced elegance. Think about the dinner parties you would have to host, the people you would meet through his connections. Can you really see yourself at country club functions with the wives of other construction workers? The condescension in her tone made my stomach turn, but I forced myself to remain calm. Kevin is one of the most well-read, thoughtful people I have ever met. He could hold his own in any conversation at any dinner party you host. My father was even more direct in his disapproval when I mentioned Kevin during one of our monthly dinners at his favorite steakhouse. Alison, you are 29 years old and smart enough to understand the realities of social mobility, he said, cutting into his ribeye with surgical precision. Marrying someone from a different economic class creates complications you may not anticipate now. Think about your children's education, the neighborhoods you will live in, the opportunities they will have access to. Kevin is successful, Dad. His business is growing every year, I protested. Small business success and generational wealth are very different things, he replied. Your mother and I have worked hard to provide you with advantages that most people never have. We want to ensure that those advantages continue to benefit you and your future family. These conversations left me feeling frustrated and hurt, but they also strengthened my resolve. Kevin represented something genuine in a world that often felt artificial and superficial. His values aligned with mine in ways that the men my family would approve of never could. He cared about environmental sustainability, social justice, and treating people with dignity regardless of their economic status. These were qualities that mattered to me far more than whether he could navigate the social intricacies of country club life. 6 months into our relationship, Kevin and I were having dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant when he reached across the table and took my hand. His expression was serious, more intense than I had seen before. I need to tell you something, he said, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. I have been thinking about this for weeks, trying to figure out the right way to approach it. My heart rate increased, uncertain where this conversation was heading. You can tell me anything. I love you, Alison. I love your intelligence, your kindness, your ability to see good in people even when they disappoint you. I love how you challenge me to be better while accepting me exactly as I am. He paused, reaching into his jacket pocket. I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you make me. When he pulled out a small velvet box, my breath caught in my throat. The ring inside was perfect, a classic solitaire diamond in a simple platinum setting. It was elegant without being ostentatious, exactly what I would have chosen for myself. Alison Crawford, will you marry me? He asked, his green eyes searching my face for an answer. Yes, I whispered, tears streaming down my cheeks. Yes, of course yes. The other diners in the restaurant broke into applause as Kevin slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made specifically for me. Later, I would learn that Kevin had spent weeks researching my preferences, asking subtle questions about jewelry I admired and observing my reactions to various styles we encountered in store windows. But in that moment, surrounded by the warm glow of candlelight and the genuine happiness of strangers, I felt more complete than I ever had before. Kevin pulled me into his arms, kissing me with a passion that made me forget we were in a public place. When we finally separated, both of us were laughing and crying simultaneously. I can't believe you said yes, he murmured against my hair. I can't believe you thought I might say no, I replied, admiring the way the diamond caught the light. We stayed at the restaurant for another 2 hours, talking about our future with the excitement of people who had just discovered they shared the same dreams. Kevin wanted a small wedding, something intimate and personal rather than the large society event my family would expect. I found myself agreeing, imagining a ceremony focused on our love rather than impressing people who might not even care about our happiness. The next morning, I called my mother to share the news. Her reaction was exactly what I had expected, but somehow worse than I had prepared for. "Oh, Alison," she said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "Are you certain this is what you want? Marriage is such a significant decision, and you are still so young." "I'm 29, Mom, hardly a child. And yes, I'm absolutely certain. Kevin is the most wonderful man I have ever met," I said, holding my left hand up to catch the morning sunlight streaming through my apartment window. "What kind of ring did he give you?" she asked, and I could practically hear her hoping it would be something she could find fault with. "It's perfect. A solitaire diamond in a platinum setting. Classic and elegant," I described, knowing that she would find some way to criticize it regardless of what I said. "How many carats?" she pressed. "I don't know, Mom. I didn't ask because I don't care. I love Kevin, not his bank account or his ability to buy expensive jewelry," I replied, my patience already wearing thin. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "Your father and I would like to meet with you this weekend. We need to discuss this situation before you make any irreversible decisions." "It's not a situation, Mom. It's an engagement. Kevin and I are getting married, with or without your approval," I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "We will see about that," she replied before ending the call. That weekend's family meeting was even more brutal than I had anticipated. My parents had clearly spent time preparing their arguments, complete with what appeared to be a printed list of concerns they wanted to address. "We have hired a private investigator to look into Mr. Morrison's background," my father announced without preamble, setting a manila folder on the coffee table between us. "You did what?" I stared at them in disbelief. "How could you invade his privacy like that?" "We needed to protect you," my mother said, opening the folder to reveal several pages of typed information. "Did you know that he grew up in a trailer park in Ohio? His father abandoned the family when Kevin was 12, and his mother worked 3 jobs to support him and his younger sister." "So what?" I shot back. "That makes him a bad person. If anything, it shows how hard he has worked to build his life." "It shows that he comes from instability," my father interjected. "Children from broken homes are statistically more likely to repeat those patterns in their own relationships." "That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard," I said, standing up and pacing to the window. "Kevin is nothing like that. He is loyal, committed, and honest." "He also has significant debt," my mother continued, consulting the papers in front of her. "His business owes money to several suppliers, and he has a mortgage on a small house in Queens that he can barely afford. He owns his own business and his own home at 28 years old. Most people our age are still renting apartments and paying off student loans," I pointed out. "Most people your age do not have access to the advantages you have been given," my father replied coldly. "We are not saying Kevin is a bad person, Alison. We are saying he is not the right person for you." The conversation continued for another hour, with my parents presenting what they considered evidence of Kevin's unsuitability while I defended the man I loved. By the time I left their house, I was emotionally drained and more determined than ever to prove them wrong. But little did I know that my family's disapproval was just the beginning. Their reaction to my engagement would pale in comparison to what they would do when they received our wedding invitation. Kevin and I decided to plan our wedding for the following spring, giving us 8 months to organize what we envisioned as an intimate celebration with close friends and family. We chose the Riverside Gardens, a charming venue in Westchester that featured a greenhouse ceremony space surrounded by blooming gardens. The setting was romantic without being overly formal, exactly the kind of place where we could focus on our commitment to each other rather than impressing guests with extravagant displays. Our guest list totaled 67 people. Kevin's side included his mother, Sarah Morrison, a warm woman who worked as a nurse at a children's hospital in Cleveland. She had raised Kevin and his sister Emma as a single mother after her husband left, working double shifts to ensure her children had everything they needed. When Kevin introduced me to her over FaceTime, she immediately welcomed me into their family with genuine enthusiasm. "Any woman who makes my son smile the way you do is already a daughter to me," she said during our first video call, her eyes twinkling with the same warmth I saw in Kevin's. Kevin's sister Emma was completing her residency in pediatric surgery at Johns Hopkins. At 26, she was brilliant, driven, and completely devoted to her older brother. Emma flew to New York specifically to meet me 2 months after our engagement, and we spent an entire weekend exploring the city together. She shared embarrassing childhood stories about Kevin while I showed her my favorite spots in Manhattan. Kevin has always been protective of people he loves, Emma told me as we walked through Central Park. But I have never seen him as happy as he has been since meeting you. Thank you for loving him the way he deserves. Kevin's best man was Marcus Rodriguez, his foreman and closest friend for over 6 years. Marcus had started working for Kevin right out of high school and had become like a brother to him. He was married to Isabella, a teacher, and they had twin daughters who would serve as flower girls in our ceremony. The rest of Kevin's guest list included employees from his construction company, neighbors from his Queens neighborhood, and a few college friends who had remained close despite their different career paths. My side of the guest list was smaller and more complicated. Beyond my immediate family, I invited my college roommate Jessica, who now lived in Boston and worked as a veterinarian. Jessica had been my maid of honor, a role she accepted with excitement and unwavering support for my relationship with Kevin. I also invited my cousin Rachel from California, the only family member who had expressed genuine happiness about my engagement. Finally, someone in this family is marrying for love instead of social advancement, Rachel had said during a phone call, making me laugh for the first time in weeks. The wedding invitations were custom designed by a local artist Kevin had worked with on several projects. They featured watercolor illustrations of the venue's gardens with elegant script announcing our celebration. We had them printed on recycled paper, a detail that mattered to Kevin because of his commitment to environmental responsibility. Each invitation included a handwritten note from both of us, expressing how much we looked forward to sharing our special day with each recipient. When I hand-delivered my parents' invitation during one of our monthly dinners, their reaction was immediate and devastating. April 22nd, my father read aloud, his voice flat with disapproval. That gives us very little time to make alternative arrangements. Alternative arrangements for what? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Your mother and I will be attending the Blackwell charity auction that weekend, he replied, setting the invitation aside without a second glance. It is one of the most important fundraising events of the year, and we committed months ago. My mother nodded in agreement. The auction benefits children's cancer research. Surely you can understand that we cannot abandon such an important cause for a wedding that, frankly, we cannot support. The cruelty of their words hit me like a physical blow. You are saying you will not come to my wedding because of a charity auction. We are saying that we cannot in good conscience celebrate a decision that we believe will lead to your unhappiness, my mother replied, her tone suggesting she considered this a reasonable position. What about Jonathan and Marcus? I asked, hoping at least my brothers would show some family loyalty. Jonathan and Amanda have a business conference in Los Angeles that weekend, my father said. Marcus and Sophia are hosting an engagement party for some of her family members visiting from London. The systematic nature of their excuses made it clear that this was a coordinated effort rather than a series of unfortunate scheduling conflicts. My entire family had decided collectively to boycott my wedding, using prior commitments as cover for their disapproval of Kevin. So none of you will be there, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Not one member of my family will attend my wedding. This is not about punishment, Allison, my mother said, reaching across the table as if to comfort me. This is about protecting you from making a mistake that will affect the rest of your life. I pulled my hand away from hers, anger finally overtaking hurt. The only mistake I am making is expecting my family to love me enough to support my happiness. We do love you, my father insisted. That is precisely why we cannot stand by and watch you throw away everything we have worked to give you. I left their house that night knowing that my relationship with my family might never recover. But I was determined to move forward with our wedding plans, with or without their blessing. Kevin was devastated when I told him about their decision, but he wrapped me in his arms and promised that his family would love me enough for both sides. The next few months passed in a blur of wedding preparations mixed with family drama. My mother made several attempts to convince me to postpone the wedding, suggesting that Kevin and I lived together for a year to test our compatibility before making such a permanent commitment. My father offered to pay for couples counseling, implying that professional guidance might help me recognize what he saw as Kevin's inadequacies. Most hurtfully, my brother Jonathan called me 2 weeks before the wedding with what he framed as a final attempt to save me from myself. "I like Kevin," he began, his voice carrying the patronizing tone he had perfected in business school. "He seems like a good guy, and I'm sure he makes you happy. But marriage is about more than happiness, Alison. It is about building a life together, raising children, providing security for your future." "Kevin and I have talked about all of those things," I replied. "We want the same things out of life." "Do you, though?" Jonathan pressed. "Have you really thought about what your life will look like in 10 years? You will be living in Queens, driving a used car, worrying about whether his business will survive the next economic downturn. Your children will attend public school and wonder why their cousins have so many advantages they lack." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Jonathan painting increasingly bleak pictures of my future while I defended the choices Kevin and I had made together. By the time I hung up, I was emotionally exhausted but more certain than ever that I was marrying the right man for the right reasons. Kevin proved his character repeatedly during this difficult period. When my family's treatment of me became particularly cruel, he never spoke negatively about them, despite his obvious anger at how they were hurting me. Instead, he focused on making our wedding day as special as possible, handling details I was too upset to manage and coordinating with his family to ensure I felt surrounded by love. Sarah Morrison flew to New York a week before the wedding, staying in a hotel near our venue so she could help with final preparations. She immediately took on the maternal role my own mother had abandoned, helping me with dress fittings, organizing the rehearsal dinner, and providing emotional support when I broke down crying about my family's absence. "Family is not just about blood," she told me one afternoon as we arranged flowers for the reception centerpieces. "Family is about the people who show up when you need them, who celebrate your joys and comfort you during your sorrows. Kevin has found that in you, and you have found it in him. That is all that really matters." Emma arrived 3 days before the wedding and immediately became the sister I had never had. She helped me address last-minute invitations, organized my bachelorette party with Jessica and Rachel, and spent hours listening to me process my complicated feelings about my family's rejection. "Their loss," she said simply when I expressed guilt about potentially causing permanent damage to my family relationships. "They are missing out on witnessing something beautiful because they are too narrow-minded to see past their own prejudices." The rehearsal dinner was held at a small restaurant in the village near our venue. Kevin's family and friends mixed easily with my small group of attendees, creating exactly the kind of warm, intimate atmosphere we had hoped for. Marcus gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes, talking about Kevin's loyalty, work ethic, and the happiness he had found with me. "I have watched Kevin build his business from nothing, and I have seen him treat every person who works for him like family," Marcus said, raising his beer glass. "But I have never seen him as complete as he has been since meeting Alison. She brings out the best in him while challenging him to keep growing. That is what real love looks like." Sarah Morrison followed with her own toast, welcoming me officially into their family and expressing gratitude for the joy I had brought into Kevin's life. By the end of the evening, I felt surrounded by people who genuinely cared about our happiness, making my birth family's absence feel less devastating. But as I lay in bed the night before my wedding, staring at my phone and hoping for a last-minute change of heart from my parents, the reality of their choice hit me again. Tomorrow I would walk down the aisle without my father, exchange vows without my mother's blessing, and celebrate with empty chairs where my family should have been sitting. Kevin found me crying in the hotel lobby at 6 in the morning, unable to sleep and overwhelmed by the mixture of excitement and grief I was feeling. "Second thoughts?" he asked gently, sitting beside me on the overstuffed sofa. "Never about you," I assured him, leaning into his embrace. "I just never imagined getting married without my family here." "I know," he said, stroking my hair. "And I'm sorry they are putting you through this. But I promise you, Alison, today is going to be perfect because we are going to be surrounded by people who love us exactly as we are." He was right, of course. Our wedding day was absolutely perfect, despite the pain of my family's absence. I walked down the aisle escorted by Marcus Rodriguez, who had offered to stand in for my father when he learned about the situation. Kevin waited for me at the altar wearing a navy suit that brought out his green eyes, his face lighting up when he saw me in my dress. The ceremony was everything we had dreamed it would be. Personal vows that made everyone cry, rings exchanged with trembling hands, and a kiss that felt like the beginning of our real life together. The reception that followed was intimate and joyful, with dancing, heartfelt toasts, and the kind of celebration that focuses on love rather than spectacle. But as I looked around at the happy faces surrounding us, I could not ignore the 8 empty chairs at the table marked Crawford family. Kevin's family and friends did their best to fill the space left by my family's absence, but nothing could completely erase the hurt of being abandoned on one of the most important days of my life. Little did I know that within 3 months, those same family members who had found our wedding too beneath them to attend would be desperately trying to insert themselves back into our lives. The man they had dismissed as unworthy would soon reveal a secret that would change everything they thought they knew about success, wealth, and the true meaning of family. Our honeymoon was a week-long trip to Costa Rica, a destination Kevin chose because of its commitment to environmental conservation. We stayed in an eco-lodge nestled in the rainforest canopy, where we could wake up to the sounds of howler monkeys and fall asleep to the symphony of tropical birds. Kevin had arranged the entire trip as a surprise, including a private tour of a sea turtle nesting beach and a canopy ziplining adventure that left me breathless with excitement and adrenaline. What struck me most during our honeymoon was how effortlessly Kevin navigated every situation. When our flight to San Jose was delayed by 6 hours, he calmly rearranged our ground transportation and found us a quiet corner of the airport where we could wait comfortably. When the ziplining tour was cancelled due to weather, he somehow managed to book us a private wildlife photography session with a local naturalist who spoke enthusiastic English peppered with Spanish phrases. "How do you always know what to do?" I asked him one evening as we sat on our lodge's balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Kevin smiled, his arm tightening around my shoulders. "I have learned that most problems have solutions if you stay calm and think creatively. Plus, I have always been good at talking to people. You would be surprised how helpful others can be when you treat them with genuine respect." During our week away, Kevin received several phone calls that he took privately, stepping onto the balcony or walking to a quieter part of the lodge. When I asked about them, he explained that his foreman Marcus was handling a particularly complex commercial project and needed occasional guidance on specific technical details. "I promised myself I would not let work interfere with our honeymoon," Kevin said apologetically after one such call. "But this project could really establish our company's reputation with larger developers." I appreciated his dedication to his business and his employees, seeing it as further evidence of the responsible, caring man I had married. What I did not realize was that those phone calls involved far more than construction site logistics. When we returned to New York, we moved into Kevin's house in Astoria, Queens. The neighborhood was a far cry from the manicured lawns and circular driveways of Westchester, but it had a vibrant, authentic energy that I immediately loved. Kevin Street was lined with modest 2-story homes, each with small front yards where children played and neighbors gathered to chat on warm evenings. Kevin's house was a 1920s colonial that he had been renovating room by room over the past 3 years. The kitchen featured custom cabinets he had built himself, with granite countertops he had installed during weekends when his construction schedule allowed. The living room had built-in bookshelves filled with everything from classic literature to contemporary architecture magazines. The master bedroom included a reading nook where Kevin spent Sunday mornings with coffee and whatever novel had captured his attention that week. What touched me most was the home office Kevin had converted into our space, removing half of his construction plans and business files to make room for my marketing materials and personal belongings. He had surprised me by installing a large desk with built-in storage specifically designed for my needs, complete with outlets positioned perfectly for my laptop and printer. "I want you to feel like this is truly our home," he said as he showed me the renovated space. "Your career matters just as much as mine, and you should have everything you need to be successful." Our daily routine settled into a comfortable pattern. Kevin left for construction sites before 7 each morning, usually returning home by 6 with stories about his crew and the projects they were completing. I commuted into Manhattan for my marketing job, a 40-minute subway ride that gave me time to read and mentally prepare for each day. Evenings were spent cooking dinner together, talking about our work, and planning weekend adventures around the city. Kevin's construction company, Morrison Building Solutions, operated out of a warehouse space in Long Island City that also served as storage for equipment and materials. I visited the office several times during our first months of marriage, meeting the crew members who had become Kevin's extended family. There was Lewis, the electrician who had worked with Kevin for 4 years and never missed an opportunity to show photos of his 3 daughters. Carmen, the project manager, was a 35-year-old woman who had started as Kevin's secretary and worked her way up to overseeing scheduling and client communications for all major contracts. Kevin gave me a chance when other companies would not even interview me, Carmen told me during one of my visits. I was a single mother with no construction experience, but he saw potential and invested in training me. Now I make enough money to send my son to private school and buy a house in a good neighborhood. These stories were typical of Kevin's approach to business. He hired people based on work ethic and character rather than formal credentials, providing training and advancement opportunities that transformed lives. His crew loyalty was absolute, with employees who had been offered higher-paying positions at larger companies choosing to stay because of the family atmosphere Kevin had created. But there were aspects of Kevin's work that I found puzzling. His office included sophisticated computer equipment that seemed excessive for a construction company, including multiple high-resolution monitors and software programs I did not recognize. When I asked about these systems, Kevin explained that modern construction required advanced project management tools and architectural design software. Everything is digital now, he said, showing me a 3-dimensional model of a commercial building project. Clients expect detailed visualizations before we start any work, and efficient project management can save thousands of dollars on each job. Kevin also traveled more frequently than I had expected for someone running a local construction company. Every few weeks, he would fly to cities like Boston, Philadelphia, or Washington, D.C. for what he described as client meetings and industry conferences. These trips usually lasted 2 or 3 days, during which he would call me every evening but share few details about his activities. Construction networking is all about relationship building, he explained when I expressed curiosity about these frequent trips. The best contracts come through referrals and personal connections developed over time. Our first major conflict as a married couple arose from my desire to attend a charity gala hosted by one of my former colleagues. The event was being held at the Plaza Hotel, with tickets costing $500 per person. When I mentioned wanting to go, Kevin's reaction was surprisingly strong. $1,000 for one evening seems excessive, he said, his voice carrying a tension I had never heard before, especially when there are so many more direct ways to support charitable causes. It is not just about the charity, I explained. This is important for maintaining professional relationships. Several of my former clients will be there, and networking at events like this can lead to new business opportunities. Kevin was quiet for a long moment, staring out our kitchen window at the small garden he had been cultivating in our backyard. When he finally spoke, his words surprised me with their intensity. I understand the professional value, but I have problems with events that cost more per plate than most people make in a week. It feels like using charity as an excuse for social positioning. We eventually compromised, attending the gala but making an additional donation directly to the charity equal to the cost of our tickets. At the event, Kevin was charming and articulate, engaging in conversations about architecture, environmental policy, and social justice with the kind of knowledge that impressed everyone he met. Several people asked for his business card, interested in discussing potential projects. But I noticed that Kevin seemed uncomfortable with the ostentatious displays of wealth surrounding us. When one woman bragged about the cost of her dress, Kevin excused himself to get fresh air. When a real estate developer complained about having to pay higher wages to construction workers, Kevin politely disagreed, explaining the economic and social benefits of fair compensation. People who do physical work that builds the infrastructure of our cities deserve to be paid enough to support their families with dignity, Kevin said during one such conversation. Viewing labor costs as an inconvenience rather than an investment in human welfare is a perspective I cannot support. His principled stance impressed me, but it also highlighted differences in how we had been raised to think about money and social class. Kevin's values were shaped by his experience growing up in economic uncertainty, while mine had been formed in an environment where wealth was simply assumed rather than questioned. 3 months into our marriage, Kevin began working longer hours and taking more frequent phone calls that required privacy. When I asked about the increased demands on his time, he explained that his company had been selected for a major commercial development project that would establish their reputation with Fortune 500 developers. "This contract could change everything for my business," he said one evening as we ate takeout Chinese food at our kitchen table. "If we execute this project successfully, it could lead to opportunities one have been working toward for years." "What kind of opportunities?" I asked, excited about his professional growth. Kevin hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Larger projects, more stable income, the ability to expand our services into areas I am passionate about, like sustainable building practices and affordable housing development." I supported Kevin completely, taking on more household responsibilities so he could focus on this important project. When he needed to work late or travel for meetings, I handled grocery shopping, bill paying, and social obligations without complaint. I was proud of his dedication and excited about our future together. But I was also beginning to notice inconsistencies that I could not quite explain. Kevin's construction site attire was higher quality than what most contractors wore, with work boots that cost more than my dress shoes and tool belts made from leather that looked expensive even after months of use. His pickup truck, while not flashy, was equipped with premium features and technology that seemed excessive for hauling construction materials. When I mentioned these observations to Kevin, he had reasonable explanations for everything. "Good tools and equipment are investments that pay for themselves over time," he said. "Cheap work boots fall apart after a few months, but quality ones last for years. Same principle applies to vehicles and other equipment." These explanations made sense, but something still felt incomplete. Kevin was obviously successful at what he did, but the level of his success seemed greater than what a regional construction company should be generating. His casual comments about business deals involved dollar amounts that made me wonder how much money his company actually handled. One evening in late July, I was organizing Kevin's desk while he showered after a particularly long day at a construction site. Among his papers, I found a folder containing documents from something called Kilometer Development Enterprises. The letterhead was elegant and professional, listing offices in New York, Boston, and Atlanta. The papers inside discussed real estate investments, architectural consulting, and project management services that seemed far more sophisticated than anything Kevin had described to me. When Kevin found me reading these documents, his reaction was immediate and uncharacteristic. "Those are confidential business papers," he said, taking the folder from my hands with more force than necessary. "You should not be going through my office files." "I was not snooping," I protested. "I was just organizing your desk like I do every week." "What is Kilometer Development Enterprises?" Kevin set the folder aside and took my hands in his expression shifting from anger to something that looked like guilt mixed with affection. "It is a consulting company I do some work for occasionally," he said. "They hire my construction company for specialized projects that require someone with my particular expertise." "What kind of specialized projects?" I pressed. "High-end residential renovations, mostly. Clients who want custom work done with complete discretion." Kevin's explanation sounded reasonable, but his discomfort was obvious. That conversation marked a turning point in our marriage. I began paying closer attention to details that had previously seemed unimportant. Kevin's casual references to business trips became more frequent and vague. Phone calls that required privacy increased in both frequency and duration. Most significantly, Kevin began spending entire weekends away from home, claiming he needed to oversee critical phases of the major project that was supposedly transforming his business. Our first serious argument as a married couple occurred in early September, when Kevin announced that he would be traveling to California for a week-long industry conference. "A week seems like a long time for a conference," I said, looking up from the laptop where I had been working on a client presentation. "It is not just the conference," Kevin explained, not meeting my eyes. There are several potential clients in the area that I need to meet with, plus some site visits for projects we are considering bidding on. Can I come with you? I asked impulsively. I have some vacation days saved up, and it might be fun to see California together. Kevin's immediate refusal surprised me with its intensity. This is a working trip, Allison. I will be in meetings most of the time, and the social events are strictly professional networking. I understand that, I replied. I would not expect to be included in your business activities. But we could still spend evenings together, and maybe I could do some sightseeing while you work during the days. It would not be practical, Kevin said firmly. The logistics are already complicated, and adding personal travel arrangements would just create unnecessary complications. The conversation escalated into our first real fight, with me feeling shut out of Kevin's professional life and him becoming increasingly defensive about maintaining boundaries between work and marriage. We eventually reached an uneasy truce, but the argument left me feeling like there were aspects of Kevin's life that he was deliberately keeping hidden from me. During the week Kevin was in California, I found myself analyzing our marriage with new objectivity. The man I had fallen in love with was kind, intelligent, and deeply committed to our relationship. But there were layers to his personality and his work that I was only beginning to understand. His casual confidence in expensive restaurants, his sophisticated knowledge of wine and art, his ease with technology and business concepts that seemed advanced for someone in construction. These qualities had initially impressed me as evidence of his intelligence and curiosity. Now they seemed like clues to something more complex. When Kevin returned from California, he brought gifts that further confused my understanding of his financial situation. A handmade pottery vase from a famous artist in Napa Valley, a vintage bottle of wine that must have cost several $100s, and a silk scarf from a boutique in San Francisco that I recognized as being extremely expensive. The conference was incredibly successful, Kevin said as he presented these gifts. Several new opportunities developed that could really expand our business in directions I have been hoping for. But something had changed in Kevin during that week away. He seemed more relaxed, as if he had resolved some internal conflict that had been weighing on him. His phone calls became less secretive, and he began sharing more details about his work, though those details only deepened my confusion about the true nature of his business activities. Then came the morning in October that changed everything I thought I knew about my husband and my marriage. I was standing in line at our local coffee shop, the same place where Kevin and I had first met, when the person ahead of me was reading Forbes magazine. The cover featured a photo of a man in an expensive suit, standing in what appeared to be a modern office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. The headline read, "The Billionaire in Work Boots, How Kevin Morrison Built a Tech Empire While Pretending to be a Construction Worker." My hands began shaking as I stared at the magazine cover. The face looking back at me was unmistakably my husband, but this version of Kevin wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His hair was styled differently, more professionally, and his expression carried a confidence that seemed almost aristocratic. But it was definitely Kevin, my Kevin, the man who left for construction sites every morning wearing work boots and carrying a metal lunchbox. The person in front of me finished purchasing his coffee and walked away, leaving his copy of Forbes on the counter. I grabbed it with trembling hands, my heart pounding as I flipped to the cover story. The article began with a photograph of Kevin in his typical construction attire, hammer in hand, standing next to what the caption identified as a luxury residential project in Manhattan. But the next page showed the same man in a boardroom, addressing what appeared to be a meeting of executives in expensive suits. According to the article, Kevin Morrison was the founder and CEO of Morrison Tech Solutions, a software development company that had revolutionized construction project management through artificial intelligence and data analytics. His company had been valued at over $3 billion in its most recent funding round, making Kevin one of the youngest billionaires in America. But instead of embracing the typical lifestyle of tech moguls, Kevin had continued working construction jobs as a way of staying connected to the industry his software was designed to serve. The article quoted Kevin extensively, and reading his words felt like hearing the voice of a stranger who happened to sound exactly like my husband. "I believe that the best solutions come from understanding problems at the ground level," Kevin had told the Forbes interviewer. You cannot create software that genuinely helps construction workers if you have never swung a hammer or poured concrete yourself. My work in the field is not a publicity stunt. It is essential research that keeps me connected to the real challenges facing this industry. As I continued reading, the article revealed details about Kevin's background that contradicted everything he had told me about his life. He had not grown up in a trailer park in Ohio. He had been raised in Seattle by parents who were both software engineers. He had graduated from MIT with degrees in computer science and business, then earned a master's degree from Stanford. His construction company was not his primary business but rather a subsidiary of his tech empire, operated more for personal satisfaction and industry research than for profit. The magazine included a timeline of Kevin's business achievements, starting with the founding of Morrison Tech Solutions when he was just 22 years old. His first major breakthrough had been developing predictive analytics software that could anticipate equipment failures on construction sites, saving companies millions of dollars in downtime and repairs. From there, he had expanded into project management systems, supply chain optimization, and sustainable building technologies. But what shocked me most was learning about Kevin's personal wealth and lifestyle. The article mentioned his penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side, his collection of classic cars, and his philanthropic foundation that had donated over $50 million to educational and environmental causes. There were photographs of Kevin at charity galas, industry conferences, and business meetings with people I recognized as some of the most powerful figures in technology and real estate. The man in these photographs looked like Kevin, but he inhabited a world that seemed completely disconnected from the modest house in Queens where we had been living as newlyweds. This version of Kevin wore handmade suits, drove luxury cars, and moved in social circles that included billionaires, politicians, and celebrities. It was a life of private jets, exclusive restaurants, and influence that extended far beyond the construction industry. As I stood in that coffee shop, clutching Forbes magazine and trying to process this impossible revelation, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my marriage was based on an elaborate deception. The man I had fallen in love with was not exactly who he claimed to be. Kevin Morrison was not a hard-working construction contractor building a modest business through dedication and integrity. He was one of the wealthiest, most successful entrepreneurs in America, someone who could afford to buy my family's estate as a weekend cottage without affecting his bank balance. But what devastated me more than the financial deception was the realization that Kevin had been testing me, just as he had apparently tested everyone else in his life. Our entire relationship, from that first coffee shop meeting to our wedding day, had been built on a foundation of lies designed to determine whether I would love him for who he really was or what he could provide. Standing there with magazine pages fluttering in my shaking hands, I felt a mixture of betrayal, confusion, and anger that left me physically nauseated. The man who had criticized my family's values and expressed disgust for ostentatious displays of wealth was himself wealthier than anyone I had ever known. The husband who had worried about spending $1,000 on charity gala tickets owned assets worth billions. But beneath my shock and hurt, I also felt a growing sense of anticipation. Because if Kevin Morrison was really worth over $3 billion, then my family's treatment of him, and by extension their treatment of me, was about to be revealed as the most catastrophic error in judgment they had ever made. And I was going to have a front row seat to watch their reaction when they realized exactly who they had chosen to exclude from their lives. I drove home in a daze, the Forbes magazine clutched in my passenger seat like evidence of a crime. My hands shook so badly that I had to pull over twice during the 20-minute drive from the coffee shop to our house in Queens. Each time I glanced at the magazine cover, seeing Kevin's face staring back at me in that expensive suit, my heart rate spiked with a mixture of betrayal and disbelief. When I arrived home, Kevin's pickup truck was in the driveway. He was supposed to be at a construction site in Brooklyn, but apparently his schedule had changed. I sat in my car for several minutes, trying to figure out how to confront him about what I had discovered. How do you ask your husband why he has been living a completely fabricated life for the entire duration of your relationship? I found Kevin in our kitchen, still wearing his work clothes and eating a sandwich while reviewing what appeared to be construction blueprints spread across our dining table. He looked up when I entered, his face lighting up with the warm smile that had first captured my heart in that coffee shop almost 2 years ago. "Hey, beautiful. You are home early," he said, rising to kiss me. "How was your morning?" Instead of returning his kiss, I placed the Forbes magazine on the table directly on top of his blueprints. Kevin's reaction was immediate and telling. His entire body went rigid, the color draining from his face as he stared at his own image on the magazine cover. "Alison," he began, his voice carrying a tone I had never heard before. "I can explain." "Can you?" I asked, my voice remarkably steady despite the emotional storm raging inside me. "Because I have been trying to figure out how to explain this for the past hour, and I keep coming up empty." Kevin closed his eyes and took a deep breath before meeting my gaze again. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "Everything I told you about growing up poor in Ohio was a lie. Everything about struggling to build my construction business was a lie. Everything about worrying about money and our future was a lie." "What else was a lie?" I demanded, surprised by the anger in my own voice. "My name is real. My love for you is real. My construction work is real, even though it is not my primary business." Kevin sat down heavily in one of our kitchen chairs. "But you are right to be angry. I have been living a double life since the day we met, and you deserve to know the truth." "Why?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "Why would you deceive me about something so fundamental?" Kevin was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands clasped on the table between us. When he finally looked up, his green eyes were filled with pain that looked genuine, though I was no longer sure I could trust my ability to read him. "Because I needed to know who you really were," he said. "I needed to know if you would love Kevin the construction worker the same way you might love Kevin the billionaire. I have learned through painful experience that money changes everything about how people relate to you. So our entire relationship has been some kind of elaborate test?" I asked, my voice rising with each word. "Not a test," Kevin said quickly. "An opportunity to build something real. Alison, I have been wealthy since I was 22 years old. I have never had a relationship with someone who knew me before I became successful. Every woman I dated was attracted to my wealth, my connections, my lifestyle. They loved what I could provide, not who I actually was." "But you never gave me the chance to make that choice," I protested. "You decided for both of us that I could not handle the truth." Kevin nodded, acknowledging the validity of my accusation. "You are absolutely right. And I planned to tell you everything after we got married. But then your family's reaction to our engagement showed me how much appearance and wealth mattered to them. I realized that revealing my true financial situation might influence you in ways that would make it impossible to know your genuine feelings." I thought about this explanation, trying to process the complex emotions it triggered. Part of me understood Kevin's reasoning, but a larger part felt violated by the deception. "What about my family's treatment of you? You let them humiliate both of us based on their assumptions about your wealth. You watched them destroy our relationship and said nothing." "I know," Kevin said, his voice heavy with regret. "That was inexcusable. I told myself that protecting our relationship was more important than defending myself against their prejudices. But I see now that I was protecting my experiment more than I was protecting you." The word experiment hit me like a physical blow. "Is that what this was to you? An experiment?" "No," Kevin said immediately, reaching across the table to take my hands. I pulled them away before he could touch me. "Alison, I fell in love with you within weeks of our first meeting. Everything about our relationship has been genuine except for the financial deception. My feelings, my commitment, my desire to build a life with you, all of that has been completely real. How can I believe anything you tell me now?" I asked, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. "How do I know what is real and what is part of your performance?" Kevin was quiet for several minutes, and I could see him struggling to find words that might bridge the chasm his deception had created between us. Finally, he spoke with the kind of vulnerability I had never heard from him before. "I do not know how to prove that to you," he admitted. "I have broken your trust in the most fundamental way possible. I can tell you that I love you, that I would choose you over my wealth and success without hesitation, that the happiest moments of my life have been the simple evenings we have spent together in this kitchen. But I understand that words are not enough anymore. We sat in silence for what felt like hours, both of us processing the magnitude of what had been revealed. Finally, Kevin stood up and walked to a drawer in our kitchen desk, returning with a thick manila envelope. "This contains the paperwork to transfer ownership of this house into your name," he said, placing the envelope on the table between us. "I also had my lawyers prepare documents that would give you access to $50 million, regardless of what happens to our marriage. I wanted you to have security that was completely independent of me or my family's wealth." I stared at the envelope, unsure what to make of this gesture. "When did you prepare these documents?" "The week after we got married," Kevin replied. "I knew I would have to tell you the truth eventually, and I wanted to ensure that you would never feel trapped by financial dependence, regardless of how you reacted to learning about my deception." That afternoon, my phone began ringing incessantly. The Forbes article had been published online that morning, and apparently several people from my previous life had made the connection between the billionaire tech mogul and the construction worker I had married. The first call came from my college roommate Jessica, who was simultaneously excited and confused. "Alison, please tell me you know about this Forbes article," she said the moment I answered. "Please tell me you have not been living in ignorance while your husband runs a billion-dollar company." "I just found out this morning," I admitted, stepping onto our back porch for privacy. "Holy shit," Jessica whispered. "Do you realize what this means? Your family is going to lose their minds when they see this." She was right, of course. By evening, my phone was flooded with calls and messages from family members who had not spoken to me since my wedding day. My mother's first message was a masterpiece of panic disguised as concern. "Darling, I just saw the most incredible article about Kevin. We need to talk immediately. There has obviously been some terrible misunderstanding about his background." My father's approach was more direct. "Alison, call me as soon as you get this message. We need to discuss Kevin's business activities and how they might affect our family's reputation." But it was my brother Jonathan's message that revealed the true nature of their sudden interest. "Jesus Christ, Alison. Do you have any idea what Kevin is worth? We need to have a serious family meeting about managing this situation properly." Managing the situation. As if my marriage was a business opportunity that required their strategic input. Over the next 3 days, my family launched a coordinated campaign to reinsert themselves into my life. Flower deliveries arrived hourly, each accompanied by apologetic notes that carefully avoided taking responsibility for their previous behavior. My mother showed up at our house unannounced, carrying an expensive bottle of champagne and acting as if she was arriving for a long-planned celebration. "Sweetheart, I'm so happy for you," she gushed when Kevin answered the door in his work clothes. "Mr. Morrison, please accept my deepest apologies for any misunderstandings. We simply had not realized the scope of your business achievements." Kevin was polite but distant, offering my mother coffee while declining to engage in the financial discussions she clearly wanted to have. When she began asking pointed questions about his company's upcoming projects and investment opportunities, Kevin excused himself to take a work-related phone call that lasted until she finally left. The most revealing encounter came when my entire family arrived for an impromptu Sunday dinner that my mother had apparently planned without consulting us. My father, both brothers, and their wives descended on our modest Queen's home with the kind of forced enthusiasm typically reserved for political campaigns. "We have been thinking about family unity," my father announced as we gathered around our small dining table. "Recent events have made us realize how important it is to support each other through major life transitions." Recent events. He could not even bring himself to acknowledge that those recent events involved them discovering that the man they had dismissed as unworthy was worth more than all of them combined. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in social manipulation disguised as family reconciliation. They apologized for misunderstanding Kevin's background while carefully avoiding any acknowledgement of their cruel treatment of both of us. They expressed regret for missing our wedding while subtly suggesting that we should consider renewing our vows in a ceremony that would properly celebrate our union. "It would be such a beautiful way to bring the family together," my mother suggested. "Perhaps something larger this time, with the kind of guest list that reflects Kevin's position in the business community." Kevin's response was measured but firm. "Alison and I are very happy with the wedding we had. It perfectly represented our values and the people who truly matter to us. But the most infuriating moment came when my brother Marcus began discussing investment opportunities, clearly angling for Kevin's financial involvement in various business ventures. "I have been working on a real estate development project that would be perfect for someone with your expertise," Marcus said, his voice carrying the kind of practiced enthusiasm he typically reserved for potential clients. "The returns could be extraordinary for the right investor." Kevin listened politely but declined to commit to anything, explaining that his investment decisions were handled by professional managers who evaluated opportunities based on strict criteria. After my family finally left that evening, Kevin and I sat in our living room processing what had just occurred. The contrast between their current behavior and their treatment of us 6 months earlier was so stark that it would have been comical if it were not so personally devastating. "They are not even pretending that this is about reconciliation," I said, curling up next to Kevin on our couch. "This is purely about accessing your wealth and connections." "I know," Kevin replied, his arm tightening around me. "And I am sorry that you have to watch your family reveal themselves this way. But I want you to see exactly who they are when they think there is something to be gained from your relationship with me." Over the following weeks, I began to understand that Kevin's deception, while hurtful, had revealed truths about my family that I might never have otherwise recognized. Their current desperate attempts to reconnect with us had nothing to do with love or genuine remorse. They were motivated entirely by the financial and social advantages they believed access to Kevin could provide. My mother began calling daily with invitations to social events where Kevin could meet important people who might be valuable business connections. My father started sending investment newsletters and market analysis reports, positioning himself as a valuable financial advisor despite knowing nothing about Kevin's actual business interests. My brothers competed to offer Kevin opportunities to join exclusive clubs and organizations where they clearly hoped to benefit from association with his success. But Kevin had learned to navigate these situations with skill developed over years of dealing with people who wanted something from him. He remained polite but non-committal, declining most invitations while occasionally accepting ones that served his own purposes. When he did attend family events, he brought along his own security detail and handled all financial conversations with professional distance. "I spent years learning how to identify people's true motivations," Kevin explained to me one evening after declining another dinner invitation from my parents. "Your family is displaying every classic sign of people who are interested in what I can provide rather than who I actually am." The final confirmation of Kevin's assessment came during my parents' anniversary party, an event they had planned specifically to introduce Kevin to their social circle. Throughout the evening, I watched my family position Kevin strategically in conversations with wealthy guests, clearly hoping to facilitate business relationships that would benefit them indirectly. But the most telling moment occurred when my mother pulled me aside for what she described as a heart-to-heart conversation about my marriage. "I hope you understand how fortunate you are," she said, her voice carrying the kind of intensity that suggested this was a prepared speech. "Kevin's success creates opportunities for our entire family. The connections he has access to, the investment possibilities, the social doors that could open for all of us." "I married Kevin because I love him," I replied, keeping my voice level despite the anger building inside me. "His wealth was not a factor in my decision because I did not know about it when I fell in love with him." My mother's expression shifted slightly, revealing a calculating look that I had never noticed before. "Of course, darling. But now that you do know about it, you have responsibilities to consider. Family responsibilities." That conversation marked the end of any possibility of genuine reconciliation with my family. Their motivations were clear, and they had no interest in building authentic relationships with either Kevin or me. They wanted access to wealth and status, and they viewed our marriage as a vehicle for their own advancement. 6 months after Forbes revealed Kevin's true identity, I finally understood the gift he had given me through his deception. By allowing my family to reveal their true character before they knew about his wealth, Kevin had shown me exactly what their love was worth. Their absence from our wedding had been painful, but their presence in our lives after learning about his money was far more damaging to my understanding of family loyalty. Kevin and I began building new traditions and relationships with people who valued us for genuine reasons. His construction crew remained his closest friends, and their families became our chosen family. Sarah Morrison continued to be the mother figure I had always wanted, while Emma became the sister I had never had. We created a life based on authentic connections rather than social obligations or financial benefits. My birth family continues to make periodic attempts to insert themselves into our lives, but we have learned to recognize their overtures for what they really are. Invitations to social events come with unspoken expectations that Kevin will facilitate business connections. Holiday celebrations become opportunities for them to discuss investment strategies or request financial advice. Every interaction carries an underlying agenda that has nothing to do with love or genuine interest in our well-being. But perhaps the most valuable lesson I learned from this experience is that family is defined by actions rather than blood relationships. The people who showed up for our wedding without knowing about Kevin's wealth proved their love in ways that matter. The family members who only appeared after learning about his financial success revealed that their affection was conditional on potential benefits they might receive. Kevin's deception taught me to value substance over appearance, character over wealth, and authentic connection over social positioning. These lessons have shaped not only our marriage but every relationship in our lives. We have learned to surround ourselves with people who would choose us regardless of our financial circumstances, and to distance ourselves from those whose affection depends on what we can provide. For anyone watching this who has experienced family betrayal or conditional love, I want you to know that authentic relationships are possible. The people who truly care about you will support your happiness regardless of whether it benefits them personally. And sometimes losing a family that was never really yours is the only way to find the peace and acceptance you deserve. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share your own experiences in the comments below. Remember that your worth is not determined by other people's recognition of it, and that sometimes the most painful betrayals lead to the most important discoveries about what genuine love actually looks like.